Excellent. I'm excited to have everybody here. If we haven't met, my Discord's over here, and I'm going to try to monitor the chat, but I'm bad at that too. My name is Elliot. I'm a developer advocate here at the Stellar Development Foundation, and I get to kind of be a jack of all trades when it comes to the Stellar network, and when it comes to building things on Stellar. I get to touch a lot of different, like the back end, the front end, the indexers. I get to be sort of in the trenches with the developers like yourselves, and also kind of communicate the user experience for a developer back to like the core team, and sort of express pain points or like that kind of stuff, while also demonstrating and kind of showcasing some of the use cases or some of the ways that you could do things on Stellar to the community at large. And so I am so excited to be here with you all this morning. Thank you very much for joining me. I know this was a couple of days in advance, which isn't always a lot, especially for different time zones and stuff. I wanted to be early in the US so that hopefully some of our friends in Africa or Europe or Asia might be able to hop on. So I am hopeful that we get some interesting conversations going. Feel free to jump into the chat with questions or, yeah, I don't really know. It's my own fault that I'm not very familiar with the ambassador section of our Discord server. And so if there's like usual like structures you guys do when you're having meetings and stuff that I should be aware of, just, call it out and let me know. Without any further ado, I would love to get into the KALE project, if that's okay with everybody. Is that coming through? Sweet. Yes. Too many screens, too many apps, all open. If you are not aware of KALE already, it is this ever popular smart contract devised by our very own Tyler Vanderhoeven, also known as Kale Pale, who I'm told, it's a rumor, his favorite food is kale. So may want to ask him about that. But he has devised this proof of teamwork token called KALE that everybody can kind of join together and mine cooperatively, collectively. And I should actually, I did not do a great job of preparing all my windows. I can show off a little bit of, has anybody here already mined KALE in the past? Because if you're all like super familiar already, that might not be anything we even need to cover. Oh, sweet. Coxie has. I know you have, Robert. Let's see. I don't know if I have browser. Cancel. Window capture. I also suck at OBS, so bear with me here. Is that showing up? Sweet. It's a twofer. Things are mostly working today. Okay, so we've got KALE, right? And it is a fantastic thing. Let's move that over. Okay. Yeah. You mostly know the drill. You plant, ask for your pass key. What? Sign in. Asks for your pass key and signs a transaction, sends it to the network. After a little bit of time, I don't know if I'm going to get in this round. After a little bit of time, you can work and then ultimately get a harvest, a bountiful KALE harvest that will pay off dividends down the road. I'm just kidding. This is not investment advice or whatever I'm supposed to say. It's a really fun sort of activity, kind of deal that the community has really jumped into and taken a really significant interest in. And it has been so fun to build with you guys and to play along and just sort of be in the midst of this exciting moment in the Stellar world. And the KALE that is mined has been really kind of raising eyebrows and getting attention in a good way about all the things that KALE can do and all the ways that, not all the things Stellar can do, all the things that Sorbonne is capable of. And so today I wanted to look at this mining contract that Tyler has developed and really kind of zero in on a couple of things, storage and authentication, that are unique in the way he designed this, that can be actually pretty helpful if you construct a contract thoughtfully and create a better user experience for your end users. So this is the README. If you go to kalefarm.xyz, I am perpetually getting those mixed up in my head and not putting them in the right order. If you go to kalefarm.xyz, then you can mine some kale. You can get to the repository, which I've cloned locally here. But it's on GitHub as well. It's open source, all that fun stuff. But if we go into the contracts folder, first of all, this structure that Tyler has made is excellent. It helps. I've mimicked this structure and copied it more than once. Sort of most of the Sorbonne examples and a lot of contracts you see have a single lib.rs file and test.rs file, and those will typically contain, in a lot of the examples that I see, those two files will contain all the contract code and all the logic. In fact, test.rs is usually just testing the stuff in lib.rs, where that's like the main sort of thing. But the way Tyler has set this up is he's got some constants defined here, like how often a block should be mined, how long a week of ledgers is, how long before a decay happens in the KALE reward amount, and all those kinds of things. But then he's got these two traits defined. First, the sort of admin kind of side of things. You've got the constructor, upgrade, pause, unpause, remove block, all that kind of stuff. And then the user side of things, plant, work, harvest. And then all of those things are defined further in these files, contractfarm.rs, where lib just sort of grabs that file, kind of plops it in there. So you're defining sort of like this lib.rs is like the meta, kind of like the architecture document, so to speak. And then the more fine-grained details of how that works and the function definitions themselves are in these sub-modules instead. I don't know if sub-modules is technically the right word to use, but we'll go with it for now. Anyway, I want to let's first look at authentication, right? So we've got this farm trait contract, which, if you remember from lib.rs, is essentially the plant function, the work function, and the harvest function. These are the three functions that the user will interact with. All this stuff, that's like admin kind of things that Tyler will use when he needs to, but all this stuff is kind of the user-facing things. So if we look in this contract farm.rs, that's where the plant and work and harvest functions are defined. Also some helper functions and that kind of stuff that we won't really worry about right now. But I want you to notice that plant, the function footprint, is farmer, which is an address, and the amount that you're going to stake, right? This farmer is requiring auth. Why do you think that is? Because if they've set an amount that they want to stake, then that has to get burned. So let's see, somewhere around here. token client new burn, right? So you're making this token client out of the KALE asset, and it gets burned when you actually stake this. So we have to require auth at the top level, because if you're using a contract smart wallet, then there can be some weird like invocation authentication coming from LaunchTube that's not necessarily passed on to the burn function properly. So the burn function requires auth of the farmer. So we require it here at sort of like the top level of the call, which is really common, honestly. Like whatever user.require auth is really common to see in a lot of these functions. In fact, if we look at, this is just the Sorbonne examples repository. Like let's look at the liquidity pool. Again, we have lib and test.rs. But every single function here, deposit, require auth. Swap, require auth. What's this? Withdraw, require auth. And this is a really sensible thing to do for like a token contract. Don't get me wrong here. Anytime your users are going to be like depositing or withdrawing or like transferring balances or tokens, you're going to want to require their authentication to make sure that, you know, the security of the blockchain is actually intact. But in cases, so plant, yes, we want to require auth, that's for sure. But in places where the user is not at risk of losing funds, right? There are no token transfers. There's no like value trading hands, so to speak. There's no risk of loss, really. If you like this work function, there's no require auth. There's like, what's the worst that could happen if somebody like farms for you? I guess they could like beat you to it. Oh well. There's really very little like poor consequences that could come about from having no auth on this work function. It does do like whatever hashing is generated is required for the mining process to happen, but there's no authentication required by the farmer themselves. Now, this gives us a couple of examples, a couple of benefits. Number one, this function, work, could be called on any farmer's behalf by anybody. So like maybe there was like a mining pool where people wanted to like hash their, wanted to pool their hash rates. They could do that without having to individually authenticate for each and every single user that's part of the pool. So this work function can be called by anybody, really, even if you just wanted to like do it on the CLI, like the old-timey days. Also, a benefit of this that doesn't necessarily hold true all the time. If your farmer is a contract, like the smart wallets on the farmkale.xyz website, then that contract has to be loaded. The WASM code has to be loaded, RAM allocated, a VM allocated. Then the check auth function has to get run, which adds, maybe not much, but adds to the overall cost of the transaction. So if you're trying to call work for a smart contract farmer, that's another contract that has to get loaded so that authentication can take place. So having no authentication on work makes it a cheaper invocation. Again, I'm not exactly sure how much cheaper it might be, but it surely it cuts down on the amount of like WASM instructions and all the resources required to actually run this function. So that's another benefit. Same thing is true of Harvest. So Harvest also doesn't require auth, and this opens up a couple other possibilities too. Like maybe right now, Harvest is harvestable blocks. I'm not sure if that's the right way to say it, but harvestable blocks stick around on the ledger for about 24 hours. They use temporary storage, which we'll get into in just a second. They stick around on the ledger for about 24 hours. And if you're using the farm kalefarm.xyz site, it harvests after every single harvestable block is detected. So every 5 minutes or so, it's running that harvest function, which, again, not bad, but it could add up in terms of costs. If you instead wanted to provide some kind of service, maybe for the larger kale community, to offer to harvest on behalf of everybody who like signs up for the service. Maybe you take a small fee in terms of the kale that they earn, but if you wanted to set up like a harvesting service on behalf of a lot of users, you don't have to authenticate, you don't have to require their authentication for each and every invocation that you do for this harvest function. Again, anybody can call this for anybody else on the network. And kind of same as like work, what's the worst that could happen? In the harvest case, it's an even better scenario because farmer, the only possible outcome is that they will get kale. They will receive value of some sort. They'll receive tokens out of this harvest function. And so like, sure, yeah, why not allow anybody in the world to call this harvest function for anybody else? There are some checks and stuff in this that we won't really get into here, but it does the work. It checks that they actually have a harvest available to them. And then it harvests it. It gives them whatever reward. It gives them whatever their proportional share of kale for the block, depending on how their mining session went. All right. Does that make sense? Authentication wise, like the work one before, we also save potentially on calling the check auth function of a contract if that's the farmer's address. If it's like a smart contract, you don't have to load the WASM, you don't have to load the VM, all that kind of stuff. Everybody tracking, having a good time? Sweet. I will take the silence as a yes. Okay, let's talk about storage then. If we look at, let's see here. Go back to that web browser. Let's go to the KalePale project on GitHub, and I am looking for the contract so that I can look it up on Stellar Expert. And I will zoom in here. Okay, so if we look at the storage, there's almost 1 million storage entries for this contract, which seems wild. Like, that's super cool, super awesome. I'm super excited about that. So we've got all of these storage entries. Like, every time you mine, you put a Pale storage onto the blockchain. Every time a new block is detected, it puts a block storage entry onto the network, all that kind of stuff. But if you notice, every single one of these is temporary. A lot of these have expired, in fact. Temporary. If we switch this durability selection, we look for persistent. There is none. Excellent question, Coxie. Hang tight for 1 second on that. There's no persistent entries. There's some instance entries like general configuration and that kind of stuff. But they're all temporary entries. Every single one of these entries. So when you are, go back to this. Yeah. When you are planting, for example, you get the auth, see if the network is paused, you create a block, and it sets your pale, right? So this set pale is the function that stores the ledger entry on chain. Farmer, what index it is, what block number, and the pale that you are saving. Sequence, this is what it is. So if we go to this function, it takes all this stuff, gets a key, which is storage pale farmer index, fun, and env.storage.temporary.set the pale for this key, right? But that's how pretty much all of these work. Storage.temporary, storage.temporary, storage.temporary. These ones up here too. All of these, except for farm index, all of these except for like the major contract wide settings that affect everybody are stored in temporary storage, which again is not typically seen. Often you'll see people put things in instance storage, which is useful, but it's not always desirable. For example, every time a contract is loaded for an invocation, the entire instance storage is read from the ledger. Great if there's always something that every contract invocation will need to know. Like it's maybe a deployer contract that's always deploying a single WASM hash, right? Every single time it's invoked, deploy, it gets a WASM hash, a specific WASM hash to get a specific kind of contract. The instance storage is where you would want to put that, because every time it gets invoked, you want that information because it's just going to be deploying, right? I saw in one, I think it was like one of the hackathon entries or Sorabonathon entries or something like that, someone had made like a chat application and they were putting all of their messages into instance storage. So if I write a message, it gets added to the instance storage. If you write a message, it also gets added to the instance storage, back and forth, and that instance storage eventually balloons. And every time you're invoking the contract, all of those storage entries get read from the ledger. Whether you're just maybe you're like running a function to check the latest message or something like that, every single message from the ledger will be read if it's all stored in instance storage. The cost of that invocation goes steadily up and up and up and up with every single message that's written. So using something other than instance storage is a good practice for things like balances. Like you don't necessarily need to know every user's balance for every single invocation. So you could put that in persistent storage, which similar to instance, but it doesn't automatically get loaded every single time. But the other option is temporary storage, which is much cheaper, and it won't have the same kind of like rent costs. It won't have the same kind of ledger cost, read and write costs, because it's meant to be like temporary. It's meant to be short-lived. These, excuse me, set pale. Where was that? Set pale. These use the default time to live settings. Yeah, these use the default time to live settings so that it expires like after 24 hours or thereabouts. So there's a bit of a like not risk, but like a pressing need to harvest these harvestable blocks, or else they will expire and you'll lose out on that potential KALE. But it also like keeps the ledger clean and clear. Like not all of these, we're talking 5 minutes a block, 12 blocks a minute. No, 12 blocks an hour times 60 times 24 is several blocks a day. My math is really great. It's lots and lots of storage entries that would just be entirely too many if they were all stored in persistent storage. So temporary storage is a really useful way to kind of keep costs low, but also introduce a little bit of like pressing need to actually use this contract and get those harvestable kale before they expire, before they're not archived, they're evicted. Temporary storage isn't restorable, which is why they expire and you can't get those blocks if they do. But doing this temporary storage is another way that this contract is used to keep costs down, to keep them low. Which is a really smart use of them. Another use I see temporary storage, if we look at like this token contract, this is not the SAC contract, but the token contract that's sort of in the example, Sorbonne examples repository. The token contract, let's see, I think it's an allowance. Yeah, it takes, so when you are like setting somebody as an authorized spender for a particular contract balance in this example, it also stores the allowance in temporary storage. Again, similar to the KALE pails, if you don't necessarily need that data to stick around forever and ever and ever and to be restorable at any given moment, these allowances are intended to expire even. You only authorize the spender for a certain amount of time, and once it's up, you don't want that ledger entry to stick around. To be sure, the ledger entry includes when it should expire, so it's not like there's a risk of that kind of thing, like somebody just extending the allowance indefinitely and they can always just use it, or that's not what's at play. But letting the storage expire and be cheaper at the same time is a benefit to the whole network. Yeah, temporary storage is fantastic. It's awesome. I like this. The KALE contract is a really, where'd it go? Is a really excellent example of using temporary storage. It's a really good example of using temporary storage in a smart way and in a way that gets the contract more interactions and more use. Okay, so let me go back to questions here. Coxie asks, who pays the gas fee on mainnet? Yes, a lot of people use LaunchTube. For the kalefarm.xyz site, Coxie, yes, it was implemented on the front end. A lot of applications that are making use of LaunchTube, my own, sort of keeps that stuff on the back end. But the web miner uses LaunchTube in the front end. Part of that is like the LaunchTube tokens are only usable for like one thing. That's invoking smart contract transactions on Stellar. Like it's not the possibility of sort of gaming that or abusing that. The result is that more people still invoke smart contracts. Also, it's like you couldn't, no, never mind. Yeah, it's a lot of people use LaunchTube. It's a really useful kind of way to invoke these smart contracts in a way that the user doesn't need to care about lumens or gas fees, that kind of thing. It's a very convenient thing. The webminer uses LaunchTube, receives either a signed Sorbonne transaction, function argument. Yep. Fees are pretty low. Yes. Yeah, I think most of the KALE fees are around 0.01, 0.02. In fact, let's check this out. Let's take a look at some of these invocations. We can see what their fees are like. So this is a work one. All of this stuff looks like about 0.013, 0.014-ish lumens for that fee. Let's see, all of these are probably pretty similar. Yeah. Let's see if we can go down to, oh my gosh, we got to go to the next page before we can get to plant. There's one. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so this one is a plant invocation, and its fee is something like 0.0275, thereabouts. Haven't used launch tube. Is in charge of providing the lumens? Yes. Yes. It's essentially, so Coxie, you ask an excellent question. Will the XLM be sent to LaunchTube by someone else, and will it essentially be used to sponsor the transactions? Not quite. Like, if this were a more like enterprise or productionized service, like the RPC services that are around the ecosystem, then there might be some kind of like balance as a developer that you might like top up from time to time. Like I have my LaunchTube key, LaunchTube authentication key, and I can check on some dashboard somewhere that like right now the balance is 1,000 lumens, but tomorrow it's 900 lumens, and the day after it's like 500. I might need to top that up, if that makes sense. That's kind of in theory. But right now, it's essentially like, since the main thing that LaunchTube is being used for is KALE, and selfishly my own KALE related things, the only thing that it's being used for is KALE. Tyler is essentially just put a bunch of lumens in this fee bucket, and he's allowing anybody who's mining KALE, like, yeah, go for it. Use this bucket that the foundation is providing along with this service. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like for KALE Pale, yes, the LaunchTube credits are funded by the foundation, if that makes sense. In theory, this service could be like productionalized by some other outside entity, and they're like, hey, why don't you sign up with me? I'll provide LaunchTube services and a really reliable RPC and a really reliable Horizon and a this, that, or the other. And that I think companies may end up taking this LaunchTube idea and sort of like folding it into, here's some other offerings we have. Oh, and LaunchTube as well. That's an excellent question. If somebody else wants to use it, like to set up and create, I think like a mainnet LaunchTube instance, if some other developer, SoraSwap, for example, I'm not saying this as like putting them out there. I'm just a project that came to mind. If SoraSwap were deciding that they wanted to use LaunchTube, that's an excellent question. I don't know if we would be like, sure, here's a bajillion lumens, have fun. But I could see a world where there's some kind of like grant for like getting it off the ground, and then maybe after the grant bucket is like exhausted, okay, now you're on your own. But I could also foresee like, okay, here's the service, put some funds in a bucket and go nuts. Like it's all open source code too. If you go to launchtube.xyz, or Z as they say in some places, then you can look at the code. You can just sort of run your own instance of LaunchTube if you wanted to. Okay, going back to the chat. If you create an entry in persistent storage, you pay the rent for the minimum TTL. Yes, which is several months. Yeah. The minimum storage is sort of like how that temporary storage can be so powerfully affordable, if that makes sense. Coxie, did I answer at least most of your questions so far? About LaunchTube, at least? Sweet. Excellent. Cool. So let's see. Anything else we should cover as far as like this smart contract? Any other questions on how it works or how it's constructed or how it's set up? He does. Now, one of the things that you might notice in the plant function and the harvest function, harvest, plant, and here's work. They all call this other function extend instance TTL. So essentially, the instance storage being the only temporary storage in the whole contract. No, did I say temporary? Persistent. The instance storage is the only persistent. Oh wait, we did one other thing. No, yeah, it was instance. It needs to stay like live and active all the time. So what Tyler's done is sort of baked into every invocation of the smart contract, whether it's plant, work, or harvest. And I suspect even in his homestead one, like let's see, if we do the unpause, yeah, extend instance TTL. Upgrade, extend instance TTL. All of these are extending the lifetime, the expiration ledger of the whole contract instance. So over the course of several thousand invocations each and every day, that cost is very, the threshold is like a week's worth of ledgers. So it's not often going to be charged, once a week or so. And that cost is going to be kind of subsidized by the various accounts that are calling this function, this contract to begin with. So it's not one single person who's paying that larger fee, still quite small fee of just a week's worth of rent at a time. It's not a single user who's absorbing that cost, but it's kind of spread over everybody. But since so many of the miners are using LaunchTube anyway, it's all just the foundation's lumens anyway. Awesome. Any other questions or thoughts? I didn't have like a ton of planned out, like here's all the bullet points I'm going to hit. I've hit like everything and just kind of talked your ears off all the more. Gonna grab a drink. Hi, Victor. I understand that in the future, SDF is planning to wind down its public Horizon instance and start pointing people towards running their own RPC or using an external provider. Does this have an impact in Sorbonne smart contracts? So Horizon doesn't do much with Sorbonne. Like Horizon is indexing the classic side of Stellar. So like the buy-sell offers, the existing built-in AMMs, liquidity pools, all the regular payment, claimable balance, managed data operations, all those kinds of things are covered under the Horizon service umbrella. So there's really not much that you would get from Horizon that's Sorbonne specific, if that makes sense. You could like use the operations endpoint or the transactions endpoint to kind of like page through looking for like invoke host function operations. But there are easier ways to do that in the RPC service server that we've designed. So I think the smart contract impact of Horizon, of the foundation Horizon being less relied upon, is relatively minimal. And we've already truncated the Horizon history. We used to be providing a full, since the Genesis block, history in the foundation provided Horizon instance. We've truncated that to a year. And there are a couple of other service providers that are, not RPC, Horizon, that are providing full historical data, Blockdaemon and Validation Cloud. And as far as I'm aware, their free tier or free offering, both Blockdaemon and Validation Cloud, offer the full history, maybe just rate limited or something like that. I'm not exactly sure. But the full historical Horizon data set is still around in the ecosystem and still being provided. Once you sign up for the webminer, you also get a C account. Yep. One more question from Coxie. After harvesting our kale, should we stake it or just hold it? That's an excellent question. Robert would probably be the best to answer that. I'm just kidding. I've seen lots of people who stake like 100% of it, and they sometimes lose it because they don't get the work done in time, or they don't invoke at the right time or something like that. So it's kind of a gamble whether or not to stake or hold. I will say that it seems to me like to make a substantial difference in the harvested kale that you get, you tend to need a lot of kale staked if you want that to be kind of the knob that affects your harvest. I'm not exactly sure, but it seems like that to me. Like if you're staking like 1,000 kale, it doesn't make much of a difference in how much you earn back when it comes time to harvest. Does SDF plan to wind down Horizon further? I know its history was reduced. I don't know. That's a great question. I'm not aware of plans to like fully sunset the Foundation's Horizon instance. But it may be. If you've heard otherwise, that could be the case. I'm not aware of any further plans to say like, no, we're just going to stop altogether. No more Foundation provided Horizon for you. When you automate, you earn more kale. Yeah, the webminer does a really good job of like, I could automate this, in fact, right now. That's a whole other fun thing, using a policy signer to do this. I don't know if it's more that it plants and works and harvests more consistently than anything else, but that's probably what it is in my experience, that automating it gets it more regularly invoked. Gotcha. Okay. Well, sweet. I think this is another one in the books, guys, unless there's any other questions. Let's see. Switch to this, I think. Yeah. Any last minute questions, friends? I'm going to move this over so I'm not staring in the other direction all the time. Why does automate not always work? That is an excellent question for Tyler, and we should all bug him about that. I'm just kidding. The anecdotal evidence I've heard suggests that maybe it's something to do with like if that tab is focused or not, like has your computer's attention essentially. And if it gets backgrounded, then the process can't run or something kind of along those lines. I'm not entirely sure, but that's my hunch or suspicion. All right. Yeah, refreshing, logging out, logging back in. Those are kind of like the typical try this troubleshooting sorts of things, I would suggest. LaunchTube does not have to be run specifically on mainnet. It also runs on testnet. I know I use it in a couple of my demo projects, the guest book, if you've played around with that. But yeah, it's very useful. There's setting up LaunchTube and like passkey kit kind of stuff. There's several moving parts to it. And I think Karsten has an upcoming kind of workshop thing about that will cover setting those things up. There's several moving pieces, and it's not always it's not always like the easiest thing to do. It's relatively straightforward, but not always. It's a lot of steps and stuff. But yes, it's nice that it's also running on testnet so that you can get all the kinks worked out and stuff like that. Expound on why automating doesn't always work. What did I already say? Focus in the browser tab. Oh, I see. Well, cool. I think then I'm going to call it, put it in the books. I've had a great time hanging out with you guys. This has been recorded, and I will get it uploaded as soon as we can. And just was great hanging out with you and getting to talk with y'all and meet you guys. If you have any questions, tag me in Discord, or I'll keep monitoring the chat for a little while and respond back. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Have an excellent day or evening, wherever you are. I'll see you around.